What's up, guys? Welcome back to the third tutorial in this series of watercolor Christmas polar animals decked out for the holidays. In today's video, we'll be doing an Arctic fox adorned with mistletoe. For supplies today, I have my Fabriano Artistico 140-pound hot pressed paper. It's on a block, so the sides are glued down. I have my Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white for the snow, and the colors I'll be using today are turquoise blue, indigo, transparent brown oxide, scarlet lake, and a little bit of yellow. You can just use a warm yellow or whatever you have on your palette. To get started, let's do the sketch. I like to start by designating where the top of the design is going to go as well as the bottom. This gives me a better idea of the overall size and dimension of the fox. And then I'm going to start with some of the stronger markings like the location of those curved legs in the front. I'm looking at the negative space between the two paws, trying to judge the distance between them, and then trying to capture the correct angle of each ear. Once you have an overall outline, you can start to go a little darker with your pencil marks and really accentuate the areas where you want to have strong contrast between light and dark. For me, in this image, it's especially going to be light and dark between those legs and on the tail, and of course the details of the face. To sketch the face, I'm marking out a little triangle shape for the eyes and nose. And if it's a little bit off, it's okay. You can always erase and start over. Once you're happy with the location of the eyes and nose, you can go a little darker with those details. I'm raising up that left ear since I felt like it was a little bit low and just making tiny adjustments and corrections. For the holly leaves, I'm actually starting with kind of a pentagon shape for where those 5 little berries go in the center, and then drawing those in once I have the location and shape. And then I'm adding the leaves and extra berries all around that central point in this embellishment on the fox. Now, of course, this was superimposed in Photoshop. You don't actually see animals like this wandering around with mistletoe on their heads. Let me know in the comments if you guys would like to see any tutorials about Photoshop or how I actually set up the designs ahead of time. Before we get started painting, I'm erasing the strong lines around the outer edges of the fox because I want most of this to be done with paint. I'm starting with wet and wet and actually extending that water a little bit into the fur area of the fox. Then I'm going to grab my Daniel Smith Moon Glow. I'm using my size 8 silver black velvet round brush, and I'm blotting with my brush right up to that edge. You can see because we pre-wet the paper, it's softly bleeding over the top of the pencil mark a little bit, creating a soft furry effect. I'm adding some suggestions of pine trees in the background, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the right side, but first I'm adding a couple of blooms to the background by just adding drops of water on the damp paper. I've pre-wet this side as well, and I'm gently swiping my moon glow along that edge and then encouraging the paint to soften, creating that same fuzzy effect of fur against a background. Just above the head, I'm pre-wetting the paper and then dropping in some more moon glow using a gentle side-to-side motion with the tip of my brush. This is just to suggest some more pine trees, perhaps. If you don't like the shapes, of course, you can always kind of wash those out and blot them out with a little bit of water. And then on the right side here, I'm creating a more specific tree using a curving horizontal brush stroke and allowing my paint to cover both the wet areas and then a little into the dry area of the paper as well. And then I add a couple blooms and a light wash of moon glow to the ground, and we're all finished with the background. Jumping into the details of the fox, I'm beginning with a light wash of indigo and the small tip of my size 4 round brush, and I'm painting in those inner ears. I'm also adding a little bit of a shadow underneath the mistletoe. Since this was added on in Photoshop, we want to make it more realistic by adding a light source and a shadow so it feels more merged with the overall composition. Now for the body, I've pre-wet the paper and I'm dropping in really light tinted washes of indigo anywhere I see in the reference photo where we need to go a little bit darker with light grays. Over the top of the nose and on the cheeks, these are some specific areas where you can add little shadows in the fur. Now in the reference photo, there's not a lot of detail. It's really hard to see any kind of contrast because it's such a bright white animal. We can play that up a little bit, but be so conservative with your colors on this white animal. Don't go too dark too soon. Begin with as light of washes as you can, just enough color to stand out a little bit against the white paper. Areas where you can be brave and go a little bit darker, of course, are right between the legs and on the lower portion of the belly where the body is turning more towards the shadow. And we can use a light gray, combining the indigo and transparent brown oxide for more of a neutral gray. And on the tail, you can really play up the fur here. The tip of the tail has a little bit of black in it, so don't be afraid to go darker here. I'm adding a second coat of color to the belly and then going really dark with my pure indigo to create some really dark shadow shapes, especially underneath the legs, and adding some fur texture by using short, quick, vertical brush strokes with the tip of my brush. Along this leg, I'm adding another shadow and then gently softening it with less paint on my brush and a little bit more water, adding some toes and then adding a little shadow on the left leg as well. When the paper is dry, you can actually scrape your brush across the surface of the paper so that your brush will pick up some of that texture naturally. This is called the dry brush technique. You can manually add a few more little brush strokes suggesting fur and really darken up that tail if you want. I'm actually playing up these shadows quite a bit more than even what I see in the reference photo and adding a really dark black tip on the tail. I think it looks really beautiful. I'm adding specific little separations in the toes using my indigo, and once that's finished, I can go into the eyes and the nose. You can make these a little bit larger than your reference photo if you want it to look more illustrative or cartoony. For the nose, I'm pretty much just painting it in a dark circle and just leaving a single highlight with the white of the paper showing through. I've removed most of my paint and now I'm painting on ever so delicately these little whiskers and the details around the mouth, darkening just underneath the mouth and adding tiny bits of fur texture right above the nose to help it feel more merged with the face. Alright, I'm mixing up some yellow and brown, and make sure that the eyes are completely dry before you do this, but I'm filling in the inner eyes with that color. Next are the leaves. To create green, I mix my turquoise blue and gamboge nova and just a tiny bit of indigo to help calm that color down a little bit, and then I'm starting with a really light wash on the leaves. Once I have a light layer, I can go in and add a second layer with a more dark color. It's that same combo of gamboge nova and turquoise blue, but just more pigment, less water. This gives us a two-tone effect within each leaf and helps them stand out just a little more. I'm darkening up the ear with the indigo and adding some shadows to help those berries really pop. Shadow shapes in between the leaves and helping outline some of those pencil marks will really make it look more realistic. Now I'm using Scarlet Lake to paint each individual berry to make them really pop off the page. Leave little highlights in the center of each one, just a little bit of the light shining on each berry. The holly leaves shouldn't take you too much time, but do be careful and use a small brush for these details. And then to help the eyes feel more inset on the paper, you can use light washes of indigo to add a little bit of fur texture. The final detail to this painting is adding snow. I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White and gently dabbing on individual little snowflakes into the background. This might take you some time, but try to vary the size of your snowflakes, make some larger and some smaller, and make sure that they're not too evenly dispersed so it doesn't look like a polka dot pattern. But there we go, there's our finished Arctic fox with mistletoe. Stay tuned for one more design I'll be sharing with you guys next week. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please hit that like button and leave me a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.